time on your Friday to come spend some time and hear a little bit about what these guys are doing in the high performance and elite sport world, and hopefully enjoy what we're going to talk about. We're going to go for about 40 minutes or so, and then hopefully open it up and leave it for you guys to ask some questions and kind of explore your own ideas and thoughts about high performance as well. So I'm not going to go through and introduce all of them right up front, but little by little get you the chance to know each of these guys. I want to start with Darren. So we're going to put you on the spot first. Darren Holder is the elite coaching manager at Cricket Australia, and they currently hold both the men's and women's Ashes World Cups, two of the highest accolades in the game. I want to just start by seeing if you can define for us, what is high performance to you? What does that mean?
Well, me or the organisation? I guess we're pretty lucky with being a national sport. We're federated and we have a lot of feeders, so I guess cricket in Australia is very similar to what America would consider football. You know, it's our national game. We would consider ourselves to be Australia's team, whereas the Dallas Cowboys probably are that team here in America, and they consider themselves to be America's team. So high performing for us is just always challenging for those trophies. We play a World Cup every 4 years in the one-day format. It's a unique game in that we've got 3 different formats of our game, one that lasts for 5 days, one that lasts for 1 full day, and one that lasts for 3 hours. So we hold the World Cup in that one-day version, and we hold those Ashes trophies, which is the big series between us and England. So we've won 4 out of the last 5 World Cups. So that's sustainable in terms of our success in that format. And high performing for us is just making sure that we keep pushing everyone forward in terms of the players that we have in those groups and being able to challenge the boundaries in the ways that we've played and evolve those games in each of the formats. So I've been lucky to work with the coaches, and I think it's an area that cricket has been a leader in terms of our coach development programs and trying to push all our coaches to be high performing and challenge those traditional boundaries. So in some ways cricket is a little bit like baseball, a lot of statistics, a lot of tradition, but we've got to evolve and grow with the growth of the game and the new styles that are being played.
To my left, Cameron McCormick is the founder, CEO, and high performance coach at Altus Performance. His clients include 2 of the top 5 professional golfers in the world. When we spoke last week, one of the things that you talked about was the difference between high performance and high performing. I was wondering if you could share your views on that.
Yeah, I guess the way I view or the difference in those 2 phrases, those 2 terms, high performance and high performing, trace origins back to my experience in developmental golf, and then those that represent themselves as exceptional given their age and ability levels. So while I'm privileged to spend a lot of time working with the players that you might see playing on TV, both male and female, I'm just as privileged to work with some of the best 10, 11, and 12-year-olds in the country, if not the world, if they could play in the same competitive event. And I think of those players that are competing at a very high level as high performers. In contrast to that, or building on that, high performing in my thought process is an attitude. An attitude says I have aspirations to do the difficult things, to elevate my skill level and iterate on a daily, weekly, yearly basis to where I become a better version of myself through an aggregation of efforts over time. So whilst we can look at leaderboards, we can look at organizations, we can look across the world and identify certain individuals as high performers, high performance for me is really just an attitude that drives effort.
Wade or Vero, anything that you guys wanted to add into?
Yeah, we talk a lot about high performing as well, and think about behaviors. What are the behaviors that separate performers or anyone really in life from other people? And it's those habits, those everyday habits. It's all about, to me, it's all about moments. This is what I see in the work that I do, all different sports. The great coaches, the great performers, they're better at navigating moments. Everything happens in moments. It's all about those little moments, those little decisions. And so how they attack moments, how they're aware of moments, and those are places where you see those high-performing behaviors kind of manifested.
Wade, let's stay with you for a sec. Wade is a professor of kinesiology and an internationally renowned coaching consultant. And one of the things that we talked about was this pursuit of optimal performance. So you pointed out to me that in order to get better, we need to start with the understanding of what better looks like. You want to share?
Yeah, we sometimes, I find we jump ahead. Everyone wants to get better. They want to be world class or high performing, and then we get right to action mode. Let's start doing something. Let's create an intervention. Let's create a program. But I always try to pull them back, say, hold on, before you start activity, let's focus on defining a shared consciousness, a shared language. Let's make sure we're speaking the same language. When you say so-and-so is a great coach, why? Why is our bobsled coach a great coach? Or why is Cameron a great coach? And let's have a conversation about what the end result is, or what the picture looks like. I always use the example of like a puzzle. When you get a puzzle and you're trying to put a puzzle together, you have a picture, right? First thing you probably do is you empty all the pieces out on the table, and then you put the puzzle box somewhere where you can always see the picture. So you can always see what it is that we're trying to build. So it's always, and we can all see the same picture. So we need, before we start putting a puzzle together, we need to identify what is the picture supposed to look like, and do we all see the same picture? Okay, now we can start building towards that picture.
Vero, let's jump over to you. In your work as a mental performance consultant for Cirque, you also work in a similar role with the integrated services team with a number of Canadian national teams out of the INSq in Quebec. First of all, I want to just see if you can explain to everybody what is an IST team and how does that model work when it comes to supporting the athletes?
Yeah, so in Canada, we work with the integrate support team, which is usually composed of all the sports scientists. So it can go from more the medical field, which is physiotherapist, the doctor, nutritionist will fit into this box. And there's all the sports scientists, which is sports psychology, which I'm usually this member. And then there's physiology, there can be biomechanics if that's useful to the sport. What else? Like, yeah, and then there's like the data depending on where the sport want to put the money. And then we all work together. So usually when the IST is highly functioning, which is not always the case, but when it really works, head coach or coaches will bring problems to the table. And rather than being like, oh, this is a physiotherapist problem, it will be like, oh, here's a situation, let's all work around this. So rather than identifying which specific professional the problem belongs to, we will bring the problem to the table, and maybe the mental performance sports psychologist can help on a physiotherapist, sorry, I'm looking at you guys, on that issue. And maybe sometimes we are redefining, if I can go back, redefining the problem, because, oh yes, it looks like an injury, but it's more than that. So we all work together on different problem, and everybody usually is bringing, even the nutritionist sometimes will have some nice idea, even if it's not her field of expertise. So that's a little bit how we work.
So to put it in context with Cirque, we talk about having an artist-centric and interdisciplinary support team. Same type of concept where the artist needs are at the center, and each of the different specialties can then contribute to what's going on and how we can work together, and how we prioritize the needs to make sure that we can optimize performance in an integrated model where we build on each other's expertise and support.
Can I add?
Yeah, keep going.
If I can add also, I like working in this type of environment because sometimes, yes, the obvious skills, yes, for sure, the physiotherapists are easily identified for their skills in treating injury. But when we do project, it's also super cool because all the other skills can contribute to the project. So we are a big team, and maybe somebody is super good in technology. So I did a decision-making project with Water Polo Canada recently, and we all worked together on that project, but it has nothing to do with being a physiotherapist or being a nutritionist or it was just these other skills that people have that were brought to the table, which is also, I think, interesting to work in IST for that reason.
Darren, let's come back to you for a second, because we talk a lot about organizational culture and what culture means to sports club and the identity of a group. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the culture of Cricket Australia and the role that, as Vero just talked about, the way that the performance sciences fill out that the culture.
Yeah, again, it's a really topical point at the moment because we have had our culture threatened a little bit. So as I said before, our identity is to be Australia's team, and we play internationally all around the world, competing against India, who have 1.5 billion people, and it's their national game. So we've got to really think out of the ordinary to maintain our position and our status as world leaders. And for us, we certainly believe that culture is a set of standards and behaviours that people act and carry on from generation to generation. And unfortunately, as the game has professionalised, we've had a few people that have risen a little bit above that and probably taken things into their own hands and performed some actions which really jeopardised the perception of our team, which has an impact across the organisation. But certainly when you come back to that performance science integration, we have a National Cricket Centre which is based out of Brisbane, where I'm based, and whether that be some Ministry of Support people, the General Manager of that department, and all of those associated, so we work just hand in glove in terms of getting the job done for, as you said before, an artist-centric approach. We've got an athlete-centered approach when it comes to making sure that every individual across the Australian squads, both male and female, in all those different formats, have their resources well met and have the services provided so that they can perform at their best internationally in different conditions all around the world, which is a challenge.
Wade, again, sticking with the theme of culture, the U.S. Olympic Committee had worked with you on a 4-year project to kind of build this culture around their winter sports program. Can you talk us through that journey, what it was when you kind of arrived, and how you approached the process of trying to build a culture, and how it took 4 years to arrive where you did?
Well, we haven't arrived there yet, but the U.S. team at the last Winter Olympics underperformed. They did well, but they underperformed to our standards and our expectations. And you always have a culture, so it's not about creating a culture, it's about reshaping or engineering the culture that you want. And so we've invested now in another 4-year cycle to standardize a culture, because we don't want just a great speed skating team or a great alpine ski team. We want excellence across the board. And so we need to have, again, that kind of shared consciousness and a shared language, so it doesn't matter which entity of the USOC or which group we're working with, we all have the same kind of mental model, the same picture of what good looks like and what we need to be doing to be better. And so it really kind of hit me. It's called Project Neptune. You'll probably hear about it at some point, but they wanted to come up with some distinguishing name for it. And we're starting with bobsled and skeleton, and then we'll probably move into ice hockey after that. So the goal is to kind of standardize. First of all, paint that picture, that puzzle box picture. This is what it looks like. And then let's standardize it across all of our landscape. But you can add to the puzzle picture. You can kind of paint parts of that as well that maybe we haven't seen yet, but there's going to be some core values, some common standards. And then really what we're trying to do is kind of infect the rest of the organization. You knew I was going to throw that in. But it really kind of hit me in the last few months traveling around the world working with different programs that you may have heard the term, like, we got to get people to buy into our culture. Why aren't they buying in? I said, you're not selling a culture. It's not something you put on eBay. Hey, buy my culture. You need to infect people with your culture. You catch culture. It's like, there's even research now that shows you catch diseases, like you catch obesity. Depending on the number of obese people that are in your circle of close friends, you're more likely to catch that disease. So it's the same idea. We want to create an infectious or a contagious environment across our landscape so that there's lots of touch points and lots of places where you can get infected. Just like when you catch the flu. How do you catch the flu? Someone sneezes on a door handle. There's actually research shows about the next 15 to 17 people who touch that door handle are going to get infected. So I'm not trying to convince you to buy the flu. Why aren't they buying into the flu? If I want them to catch the flu, I'm going to sneeze on them. So, right? Or sneeze on the door handles. So it's that same kind of analogy. We want to create a contagious environment, and we need strong carriers. So that's our leaders, our senior athletes. They need to be highly contagious, and then keep spreading the virus.
So let's go to the north. Hold on there. I want to quickly go. So we heard the USA point of view. Let's go.
Oh, I'm the north.
Let's go to Canada and see if there's a similar approach to team culture amongst the teams, at least that you've been working with.
Yeah, so the COC, which is competing here, is also creating that type of culture for, so now they are still working on that. It's a work in progress that I've been lucky enough to kind of touch a little bit with the COC people, and what they try to do is especially a little bit like you were saying, actually identifying the major component of our culture. We are like, I guess there's Canadian in the room, so I don't need to tell you that we are way less people than here. So we need to be really smart with our approach, and our context is really complex because we are as big country as here, actually bigger, and with really few people which are living all across Canada, which make it a little bit complicated. But yeah, we try to identify now, and I think we are really at the identifying piece of the puzzle, and then it will be the sneezing part, I guess. Now I will take that expression. I will encourage COC to sneeze more.
Can I just mention really quick? And it's funny, like I hadn't spoken to Vero about this, and I'm actually from Canada. I'm Canadian. I work with Canadian Olympic teams too, and you know, it's painting a picture and analogies to help people see what you see. So when we talk about culture, this idea of a virus and how every single person, you say, oh yeah, okay, they kind of literally go, oh, I see it, I get it, and then you kind of create a language to kind of spread those values.
Darren, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to talk about, I guess, this contagious, infectious piece that Wade and I have certainly been talking about for some time. And so in the last year or so, we've done quite a bit over 3 or 4 years now, but Wade came down to Australia, and that's part of what I'm trying to do with coaching, not just in cricket, but to grow that coaching profession, and that it is a profession and it's valued more highly than it has been in the Commonwealth countries, probably compared to America, where coach is king. So there are 2 Canadians up there, even though he wears, you know, his turncoat to another country. And there's 2 Aussies, you know, we're both from Australia. But Cameron's been living here for some time, but in Australia it's certainly not as revered to be a coach as it is in the United States. And to bring Wade down, and we went on a campaign, or a crusade if you like, to infect as many people as we could away from cricket, which actually elevates the role of the coach in cricket as well as part of that process. But certainly continuing that journey, and you've been a part of that, Bryan, with our trips which have come across to be in this part of the world and just exploring performance environments, whether they be in the arts, entertainment, sport, college, industry, to show our coaches that preparing their athletes for performance is much more than just the X's and O's that we perform on a cricket field day in, day out.
I think in Canada, now I'm thinking about that, I was not expecting that question. So we do what we call Olympic Lab. So all the athletes that are targeted and all the coach and staff member will be invited to these super intense weekend, where I think it's a way to sneeze the culture. So we pick I really like that. So we pick one topic for every Olympic lab, and there's usually 2 a year for 4 years, which target the different winter or summer sport. And this is a way to really, like, they will pick a topic, and then the whole Olympic lab will be about developing this skill or this behavior. So I think this is maybe a way for us to regroup everybody.
All right, Cameron, you've been quiet for a little bit, so here we go. Your model at Altus is slightly different, and how does your role work as a high-performance coach with Jordan or some of your other elite athletes? How is that set up for you guys?
Yeah, I think that the best visualization that I can give you is that I think of my role as a coach is that of a GPS unit, providing position and velocity directions to the athletes, whether they're 10 years old or world's best. The feedback we provide is to ensure that they're always moving in a direction that's amplifying the efforts that they're investing. That's efforts in parent financial resources, or time, effort, sweat equity, you might call it. Because the last thing that an athlete wants is to feel like they've put in 10 to 40 hours in a work week if you're a professional athlete, and for it to have zero yield. I don't think in any capacity in life we want to have zero materialization of effect for our efforts. So part of the role there is also challenge as well. As a call to action, oftentimes you feel like you're working hard, but in answering the question of are you getting by versus are you getting better, we need a mirror. And oftentimes we are that mirror, that reflection for those efforts. That touches on probably a simple outlook of how I feel, or what I feel the role I play for those athletes, and hopefully to this point it's been effective enough for me to continue to kind of plot or move in that direction.
So, Vero, since you've had a chance to work both with some Cirque performers as well as with elite national athletes, can we compare and contrast a little bit about your experiences working with both sides of that?
So the nature of the work first is really different just because of the context. So most of the time, the national athlete, I will meet them in person because they are in Montreal, which make the work, and I really promote integrative work. So less and less I'm doing office, like one-on-one meeting with athlete. I'm going directly in the gym, by the pool, depending on which sport it is. And I will work in collaboration with the coach really, really often to develop mental skills through training, like through actual technical training rather than talking about confidence. Like it's super cool to talk about it, but if you don't actually train it or create drills that are meant at developing confidence, well, the impact is lower. I will give you a fun example. Like the water polo coach came to me and he was like, confidence is a big issue in our team. Like we need to be more confident. And I was like, okay, like it's a mental skill that a lot of coaches are coming to mental performance to work on. So I was like, how many hours a week are you willing to give in your training session to develop confidence? And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, how many hours can I have with them in the pool? And he was like, oh, can you just do a couple workshop on confidence? And I was like, no, I can't. Like, I mean, if you want to really develop confidence, we will have to develop training sessions that are like aiming at developing confidence. It took a little while, to be honest, to convince him that that was the way to go, but I think I succeed to do that. So in the national teams, I'm in like the field, on the field, on whatever, you get it. I'm a French speaker, so I have kind of a little problem sometimes. With Cirque, because like when the artists are in Montreal, I will meet them in person, which is always a big privilege, but most of the time I see them through Skype, which it's unfortunate because it doesn't allow me to go on the field. I have to say though that some coaches are really involved, so I can talk to them and suggest them some strategies to implement better, different strategies directly during training. So yeah, but most of the time it's through Skype, and I'm doing mostly mental skills development, which I believe in, but for sure the impact is a little bit less interesting. Sorry. It's just my belief, though.
Going to shift a little bit here. So, Darren, I want to come to you and talk. Development pathways are critical in order to have sustained success in an organization. I want to talk about how learning and development plays a role in what you could do at Cricket Australia with your coaches and with players that are maybe looking at what's next for them.
Yeah, well, we actually have one of those on this trip, and he's been a 4-year project. So in the last 2 years of his career as an international cricketer, we started the process of getting him ready for transitioning to coaching. So that would be very similar, I imagine, to artists who make that move across. But I guess one of the things that we have in Australia and Canada as two topics of conversation are a model of education where you have courses that are set out at level 1, level 2 and level 3, but they're those formal stepping stones, if you like, to giving you an entry pass to that coaching world. But what I believe very strongly in, and what we've had great support to do, is these experiential tours where we bring our coaches away into both non-cricket environments. So educationally talk to people like Wade, who's got great expertise, meet with great coaches, meet with people from different backgrounds, and spend time just exploring performance and the things that they can offer to broaden their mental models and give them better chance to be better practitioners, and really drill into the applied processes of how does that work for us when we go back and step into the team environments that we're responsible for and put those things into practice. So learning has been elevated, and I guess my role is being to shift the traditional mindset of our coaches and our administrators to move them into that space, but then also stimulate the curiosity so that we've got that appetite and that real growth mindset that people want to pursue greatness within our sport and keep pushing the boundaries forward. So there's definitely some structures and processes that sit behind that. So we've got some strong systems that are about observation. So I'll work with Wade, who's got some great theory to support me, and we'll put in place observation frameworks. So I can go into any coaching meeting in Australia when they're talking with their athletes, and whether it be a meeting, whether it be practice, or whether it be a performance environment, have a really clear framework around how I'll observe and then how we give them feedback on their coach performance in that environment, and then that can help them to improve and be better for their athletes as well.
So let's go to the professor then. You, not long ago, you went over to Ireland and spent some time with the IRFU and talked a little bit about, tell us a little bit about that interaction and what were some of the things that you kind of were looking at when you were there, and what your takeaway from the IRFU was.
So I was in Ireland about a week and a half ago for a week with their national team. They're ranked number 2 in the world right now. They're very close to the New Zealand All Blacks, who've held the #1 world ranking in rugby for 85% of the time there's been world rankings. And they're going to meet head-on in Dublin in a couple of weeks, which could be for the #1 ranking, which would be huge. But spending time in environments like that, they really want to learn. The best coaches, the best organizations I've been around, they're always curious. They always want to learn, and humility underpins that, because you have to acknowledge that you can learn, and from anyone. And I saw that with the coaches there. So they have 4 professional teams and then their national team coach, and they were all very curious about how to get better. So you're already almost the best in the world, and you're investing in continually wanting to get better. And I'll share a story about that. I worked at UCLA before I worked at Fresno State, and I spent a bit of time with John Wooden, basketball coach and widely regarded. If you look it up, he's typically finishes #1 if you look at rankings of best coaches of all time. He was actually voted the coach of the 20th century. And this is about 20 years ago now. I was tasked with driving him home in LA from a class, a psychology class. He came in to speak. He's probably about 90, 89. And first time I'd met him, and we get in my car, and 10 lanes of traffic, and driving in rush hour in LA, and he's sitting beside me in the front seat, and I'm driving, and he's talking the whole time, but the whole time I got the death grip on the wheel, and I'm just thinking, don't become known as the guy who killed Wooden. Don't become known as the guy who killed Wooden. I'm just driving back, and then I was in the
This was a
carpool.
really bad self-talk.
Yeah,
Should have not
exactly.
tell
Yeah,
you
yeah.
this.
Don't hit it into the water. And so I was driving down in the carpool lane, and I had forgot which exit. It came up really quick on us, preoccupied. And so I veered out of the carpool lane across like 6 lanes of traffic. I had it under control, it was fine. But yeah, you're not supposed to get across out of the carpool lane on the double line, right? And he was very calm, and he put his hand on my arm, and he proceeded to give me a lesson on driving and the rules of, entering and exit carpool lanes, and he went on. It was very methodical. Like, it wasn't a lecture, but it for him, and I was talking to one of his former players after, because it always stuck with me, a guy who played in the NBA for 10 years, and I told him that story, and he said, that's Coach. He was a teacher his whole life, and that car that you were in was a classroom. And he was, to the day he died at 99, he was always teaching, but he was always learning. The other thing that always stuck out with me from that initial car ride was when he was either he was talking or asking me questions. So, greatest coach in history is asking me questions. I didn't have a chance to get a word in to ask him questions. I was like, why would he care to learn from me? But that was And I see that same kind of mindset with the best. Doesn't matter, they don't look at title or position. I could learn something from you. What'd you see how to practice today? And always kind of stretching.
One of the things you also said that I want to go back to about your time with IRFU was this idea of evolution, not revolution, and that to expose yourself and be willing to learn, but not at the expense of giving up who you are. I was wondering if you could maybe tell a little bit about what they talked to you about with that and what you observed when you were going through it.
Yeah, Darren and I talk a lot about that too, and that idea of we have a tendency to want big changes. Fire the CEO, fire the head coach, USA Gymnastics is going through that right now, a huge mess. But they waited too long. They waited, it's like the Titanic, right? You hit the iceberg, okay, well, now we're in trouble. So it's constantly looking out for, you're not waiting for a crisis to change. And one of my favorite examples of that is the World Cup of Soccer in Brazil in 2012, 14. And Brazil lost in the semifinals to Germany 7-1. And if there's any football or soccer fans in the room, that was catastrophic. Home turf, projected to win, #1 in the world, and you lose to Germany 7-1. It was 7-0, I think, at one point. It was fast and ugly. And of course, the next day, fire the head coach, who had won a World Cup already with another country, very good coach. And then they bring in outside consultants, hire an outside consulting firm, and the front page of the English language newspaper in Brazil had a picture of people crying and big bold letters. This is the national newspaper. End of the world. Heaven forbid we lost a soccer game. End of the world. Fire everybody, and we want a revolution, right? And they even had quotes in there. The head of the Football Federation was saying, we need people with new ideas. We need to think about football differently. Why would you wait, think about that, why would you wait for the end of the world to have new ideas and to think differently? And that's a separator, and I think we kind of fall into that trap sometimes. We get comfortable, we're good enough, things are fine, and it takes a lot of energy and effort to constantly evolve and get better. And we're not designed, as humans, we're not designed to evolve. We're designed to maintain homeostasis, stable states. So it's a push. It's not normal for us. We're not wired to constantly want to get better and change. We like to just find a spot and be safe with it. So it's kind of pushing people out of that natural tendency. But the best are very good at that. And how much of that is as a result of the environment they're in, or just innate abilities, or their characteristics? It's probably a combination of all those things.
Data and technology. Cameron, how has the influx of the amount of data, the speed at which information is available, maybe changed the way that you operate or the way that you coach your athletes? How does it work for you?
Information, data, are channels, they're signals. And discerning among the multitude of signals what actually is true signal versus what is noise, I guess can be summarized by, I think it's an Einstein quote, which goes something like, all that can be measured may not matter, and all that may matter may not necessarily be able to be measured. So we take a very data-informed versus a very data-driven approach to utilizing what can come from the performance arena, and just as much what can come from the training arena. And that means the technology that we use, whether that be the launch monitors that are most popular these days, any piece of tech that you could apply to the club to capture club information, any piece of tech that you might be able to apply or use to monitor movement patterns, body mechanics, 3D motion capture, any piece of new tech that may be emerging that would be able to create perspective of what's happening inside the engine or underneath the hood, if you will, the things that are invisible to the naked eye. So the approach that we take is one of, let's try and discover where it's going to shine the light, what it can illuminate, but also practically not knowing whether that's going to be valuable, we have to be careful. We're conservative
in particular with what we expose the athletes to as well, from the standpoint of not wanting to overwhelm them with anything other than the task of simply getting the job done, moving the ball from point A to point B. In our world, I think that when I say our world, the golf coaching world, there's this great tendency to think of the modern tech, the new shiny piece of equipment, as a panacea, that it's going to be the cure-all. And there's a greater tendency for that to create coaching error and therefore player or athlete error than it is creating benefit. So I err on the side of trying to rely on intuition first, call it the superpower of being able to see what you see, tuning into player-driven feedback, golf ball offered feedback, using the golf ball as the barometer for what may or may not happen, and then the tech serves as oftentimes a secondary, confirmatory, or even sometimes a tertiary resource that may either shift the direction of investigation or change the direction of intervention. But moreover, I'm a skeptic, preferring to rely on those things that I've developed over a more than 20-year career of developing some pretty craft skill.
Open up to all you guys here. I think I'd like to look into a little bit about how research fits into all of your different worlds. So how have been ways that you've been able to bring research to provide value to your organizations or to the work that you guys do?
Start with me, the non-researcher. Yes, from a
Microphone's
yes,
over.
grab
Yeah.
grab the other one.
From an applied. It's me, clearly me. I can speak.
All right,
I can
they're
speak
done.
loud. So from applied standpoint, I'm really curious, and so to read what's happening in the research community is important to me. But yet at the same time, and this is not to disparage what is happening in the research community, I feel like the solutions that I need for the players that need them when they need them need to be super agile. So it's like saying research is looking historically and informing practice. Research is looking historically and hopefully informing practice, but at the same time, when a player is standing in front of me and sucking, not being able to control their ball, I need a solution right there and then. And so I'm going to throw stuff against the wall, and I've largely expanded what I call my playbook just through trial and error. And I come to recognize the things that are effective because they're effective with the players that are standing in front of me. And more often than not, I find validation after the fact that there's research going on that confirms, oh wow, actually you did this correctly. Oh, you're on the right track. So it's kind of a convoluted response, I guess, that I'm really curious about it, and I tap into all that I can from the scientific community, but at the same time, when a player is standing in front of me and they need a solution, I have to give it to them there and then. We're going to create argument here now.
Yeah. I just want to get in before these two because I know they're going to talk about being pracademics, and the three of us have talked about that term for a little while. These two coming from an academic background and being applied, very applied in the work that they do, and I guess I'm probably the reverse, being a practitioner, a coach for 20 odd years internationally around the world in the game of cricket, who won't do a thing unless there's evidence to support it. So there has to be academic evidence to support any of the programs that I put in place. So if we talk about a coaching study to the United States with groups of cricket coaches and it's extended to golf coaches and others, then how are we going to measure the effectiveness of that program and what are we going to do to put around it? Well, enter the University of Ottawa in Canada, so we've got a collaboration with them, and the University of Queensland in Brisbane, who have two of the leading researchers in the world in the area of social identity and social learning and constructivism around the value creation framework. So there's some stuff done by Wang and Trainer that have a model, and we go back to each and every one of our coaches that enter into these tours and put a framework around them with interviews and further follow-up and research so that we can provide them with an opportunity to identify and reflect upon the things that created value for them immediately when they were here, and those that might be in buckets of potential or applied or realised value for down the track, and how we might enact some processes to bring those to life in time to come.
I can add in.
Add in? I'll go with a circus
Coming from an academic background, I've definitely shifted my mindset on that over the years. I think I see, and Cameron hit on it, I see research less about providing answers and more about acting as a stimulus. So I don't expect to go and do a study in a lab somewhere with 12 students who happen to volunteer for my study and then tell Cameron how to coach. But giving that article to Cameron might stimulate some ideas for him, or maybe get him to start thinking differently about how he does some of the things he does as a coach. So it's not, here's the answer, Cameron, go do it. It's more, here's some theories and some ideas that cut across disciplines. And you know, we did a little study, just like you do studies every day as a coach. You're doing studies, and let's talk about it and share ideas. So we're both kind of expanding our ideas and our mental models of what good is and how we can become better. So to me, I think two things. One, research is less about providing answers, at least in our field, and more about acting as a stimulus, providing a stimulus for more thought and reflection. And then coaches, the best performers, any performer in any field, the best ones, they're scientists. They're constantly running experiments. Every day, they're tinkering all the time. Coach Wooden, classic example. And essentially what we're finding now, he's passed away, but he coached for 40 years, and he was tinkering all the time. Now, guess what? We have lots of research to support what he did, and we have big terms for it, and a whole new language, but he was figuring it out on his own every day in the gym.
Yeah, maybe I could answer the question by telling you a little bit about the research I did to show to the sport domain that bringing some circus intervention was worth it. So I was lucky enough that when I was finishing my master's degree, I got an internship at Cirque du Soleil in Montreal at the headquarters when there was, maybe a lot of you knows the general formation, when there was this program which were bringing athletes / artists in, and they had to go through this 12 weeks, I think it was, am I right? And during that time, I was with the mental performance consultant, Jean-François Menard, maybe some of you know him. But surprisingly, I was as interested in all the artistic session. And again, maybe some of you know Michou and Massimo, which are two artistic coach, can I call them this way? And I was fascinated about how the athletes / artists, or athlete becoming artists, were evolving mentally and emotionally during those sessions. And I was like, wow, there's something there. But try to explain to sport that, hey, you should bring like theatrical improv and comic improv into your daily training. They're like, well, no, like what's this? It's ridiculous. So I was like, okay, maybe I should use science to show that it can actually have a psychological impact. So I asked Michou and Massimo, and I was like, hey, would you be willing to take some figure skaters? I was a figure skater myself, and I was working as a mental performance consultant, so this is the practitioner side of the story. And you know, when I was, again, trying to improve their confidence and their capacity to just perform freely when the performance was under pressure, I thought that my intervention were having not necessarily the biggest impact. And when I was seeing the artists at this Cirque, I was like, this is the way to go. Like, they do something, they walk through the mess, they need to work on that. So I asked Michou and Massimo, were amazing, and they accept to kind of transform a little bit their intervention to bringing into sport. And I measure different psychological variables such as self-esteem, mindfulness, creative attitude, and values. And we showed that indeed, after 20 hours of intervention, so we started with Massimo, which really hit them hard with the Buffon training, for those who know. And then after that, it was Michou that was coming in and bringing things a little bit more into reality. I don't know if I can say that. And yeah, we've done this 20 hours, show that it was working, it got published. And now when I'm presenting that, coaches like me and Matthew Sparks, which you may know, we did a talk at the Sport Innovation Summit last week, and we present those results. And after that, the sport coaches came to me and they were like, okay, can we do that? So I think in a way at some point, like, science is useful to convince people to get into out of the box intervention, because if not, they're like, you're a crazy clown thing. No, not in my gym. But when you show that it's working, okay, maybe we will. So hopefully there will be more of this in sport at some point.
Two more questions for you guys quickly, and then I want to open it up to you guys to ask these guys questions. Staying on the speaking tour concept, next Monday, you and I are in London presenting at Leaders in Performance, the world's largest high-performance conference that there is. You want to give them a snapshot of what that is going to be
You're
about?
putting pressure now. I didn't know it was the world biggest whatever. I'm like, oh, really? Well, actually, we want to, I think our main message will be to walk people through this idea of how you can make people innovate. And so we'll start with, and I will not use buying in because I know those guys don't like this, but how do you, so when you have a creative idea, when you, and I like what you said about revolution or evolution. So when you want just not to make a revolution, but make your field evolve, sometimes it required a little bit of creativity because it's hard when things are going well to challenge your field. You're like, hey, everything is okay until like big crash happened, and now you're, oh, finally it was not that good. So I think what we will suggest is a 3-step process where the first is how you rally support and what is facing resistance, because God know that you face resistance when you have an idea that is a little bit different. Then we move into the how do you manage discomfort, because when you implement a new idea, people will get uncomfortable and nobody likes that. He was talking about homeostasis, this is not a good word, but this tendency to want to really stay stable. So when you challenge the habit, people get uncomfortable. How can you manage that? And we finish by data, but like data in the way that, and I think you said not everything can be measured. And we finish our discussion about, yes, we can measure it, but there's a bunch of, or a lot of it that is not measurable, and I think it's emotional growth. To be honest, when I did the improvisation with Michaud and Massimo and the skaters, yes, we measure variable, that was nice, but the most important thing is that a lot of our skaters grow emotionally, and I think this is what makes them stick. So I think our talk is about that. I hope I'm right.
Last thing, I just want to each you guys quickly chime in. What do you see as the next big thing in managing human performance?
I guess the most curious thing, my largest point of curiosity would be the frontier of what's happening inside the brain, being that's the CPU. So again, having no idea what I'm talking about right there, I'm most curious there.
If I had to redo my study, I would do neuroscience. But I think I've done enough now, so I'm not going to redo another one, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little biased, and I agree that we're always striving to understand human behaviour. I don't think we'll ever fully have that captured. And neuroscience is one way of understanding a little bit more about it. But I know that Mark Shapiro, who's the president of the Blue Jays, and I share something similar, especially in American sport, that I think coach development has only been relatively new in most elite professional sports, and if the coaches can be informed in how to deal with people better and better, that's just going to continue to be a point of difference for elite organizations.
All of the above, I'd say all of it. You know, and it's funny because I'm listening to this and we're always looking for what's next, the next big thing, and we haven't figured any of the other stuff out yet, honestly. You know, how to connect with people, basic emotions and social connections, and so yeah, I'm really curious about neuroscience and how that will help us better connect with people, but we haven't figured, honestly, I haven't seen us really figure out any of it yet in terms of the connection part, the teaching part, the feedback, and you know, you could pick any little topic and go really, really deep, and what you'll end up finding is more questions. Geez, now I've learned all this, now I realize how much I don't know. And I was asked to write this book 3 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago. It took 3 years to write it, and all it did was really humble me. Like by the time I got to the end and the publisher finally said, enough, you need to publish this, I was kind of embarrassed. Like, I don't know if I'm really worthy of writing a book about this, because what it did was it forced me to go deep into all these fields and really realize how much I don't know, or we know collectively.
Thank you, guys. You guys, questions, anything you guys want to ask them while we've got them? Chat.
I have a question.
All right.
You all touched on sports that are team sports where there's more than one person competing, and you also touched on people who compete solely on their own. And this is a two question. How do you educate a team versus somebody who's singly competing for themselves? And then also, what's the difference between a performer that's in Cirque du Soleil and somebody that, if they're a figure skater, 4 minutes can change their life? How do you educate those two kind of scenarios? Question.
While they're thinking, I'll give them an opportunity to reflect and digest, processing. Okay. So to me, the similarity there, the principles, always look for principles, and all of life is a performance. And yeah, the consequences may be different, and they will be in every performance. But that's where I think come back to habits, helping people develop high-performing habits. So whether you're a surgeon, I've worked with pilots, who work with CEOs, lawyers, any type of performer, everything's a performance. And really what I've started to find some kind of resonance with when I work with a lot of high-performance people is I challenge them. I'll follow them for a day or 2 days. We'll go to team meetings, we'll go ride the bus, we'll go to the stadium, we'll go to a training. And I'll push them. How do you know you won the team meeting? And they're like, what do you mean? We just had a meeting. Yeah, did you win it? What do you mean? Well, you ran a meeting. Did you win the meeting? Okay, did you win the ride to the stadium, the team bus? Did you win that? What are you talking about? But everything's a performance. Everything you do is a performance. So, and to kind of, and yes, and you say, well, there's big performances, and then there's everyday performances. But the best don't really approach it that way. You should have pre-performance routines in a sense. Like I always tell coaches, if you're not ready to, when you go out to run a practice, for example, if you're not ready to perform and really view that as a performance, you're probably better off not running a practice. You wouldn't let your athlete just show up and go out and perform or do a show, right? They have to get ready for it. So you should be getting ready for all these different kind of moments in your performance domain. And just the last thing real quickly on that, our story popped in my head. Our women's national team, volleyball team, they won the world championship in 2014. First time ever, 17 world championships. We've never won one. Always very, very good, always world class, but never won one. And we hired a guy named Karch Karai, who's voted the all-time best volleyball player of all time. And it was his first head coaching job within 2 years, so first world championship. Novice coach. God bless you. Yeah, exactly. Somebody just they won his first time at a world championship. They won a world championship, and about a week after that, we were in a room like this, and we're talking about it, and someone asked him, "Well, how did you get them ready for that big game?" And again, it didn't process. What do you mean the big game? Well, the championship game that you just won. Said. And very nonchalantly said, since I took over the program, we've played 165 games. Every one was a world championship game. We played in 165 world championship finals. That's how we approach it.
Whilst on surface, golf seems like it's an individual sport. One person that is responsible for striking ball and signing for that score at innovating holes, or I have to play professional holes. My role as a coach is, as I mentioned before, primarily as a navigator, but yet I'm working still within the structure of a team. I might be the primary navigator, but yet in the case of a youth athlete, I have two parents, likely. I maybe have siblings, I have friends, I have other coaches that are involved in that person's development. And so therefore it's my responsibility as somewhat of a leader inside of that team organization to provide direction, to quote-unquote deputize all those involved and be as descriptive, as authentic, as transparent with all of those stakeholders as I can to work in favor of what? The person at the center, the nucleus of this, which is the dreams and goals of that, in this case, youth athlete. when I'm working with professional athletes, it expands even broader. Now I have agencies, I have sponsors, I have a caddy, I have a wife, husband, fiance, and all of those things are on my radar as things to manage. In the context of managing signal-to-noise ratios, where is the message that's driving the self-confidence of this athlete coming from? Is it coming from the greater audience of fans? Is it coming from the greater audience of the press? What influence is coming internally from that family structure? So all those things are on my radar, but yet at the same time, it's the player that's pulling the trigger, making decisions. But yet I feel like it's a pretty strong role that I try and play to upskill everyone in that organization to keep them abreast of everything that they need to be doing to help this player out.
Any other questions? Well, we've got them.
I
Holly?
have one. It's more important to our people here, but have you ever followed a former professional athlete that ended his career or her career and still needed to be coached? Maybe he remained in that sport or not at all. I'm just talking about like our artists transitioning after maybe 15 years on the show. Some of them find right away what they want to do, and some of them don't know who they are anymore after stopping a life of performing and competing. So I was wondering if any of you.
Yeah, maybe I can. So in Canada, we even have a program that is called Game Plan, which provide athletes when they retired a specific program. They can do internship, they can go back to school, and they really provide them a support, rather it is financial or rather it is just information, because it's really, as a mental performance, I would say that most of the time when an athlete is retiring, he will stay in touch with me for a good year, and I know a lot about the school system, so they have a lot of questions, like when you are in sport for like 10 or 15 years, and then you're 25 and you're like, oh, I would like to have an undergrad, or I would like to have a master's degree, how is the system working? So in Canada, we are lucky to have this program, and as a mental performance consultant, never ever I will stop my work when the athletes stop the sport, because I think it will be a major mistake, because they need more support then than when they were athletes sometimes, depending on personality for sure, but yeah.
I mean, specifically in Australian professional sport, there are programs with every organisation, every franchise would have a we call player development manager, so they're partly responsible for that planning process alongside the athlete to transition them across. But there'll be some certain situations, and we've been talking about one of them on this trip, where one of our leading international players, so a pitcher, in your case, a bowler for us, his knee blew out, like in England, on a tour, playing for the Ashes, and within 24 hours of that retirement, the psychologist was on the phone to me, so Hero's equivalent, to talk about putting a plan in place for his transition to coaching, and he's now a third year into his coaching career, and he's done a good job. So sometimes it's a more formal structure, and other times it's a little bit of we have an internship program, so they might want to work in marketing or other parts of the business, but there's also the coaching route that some of them will take.
We have time for another one or two if there are. Not, Alistair?
Just a kind of a general question about motivating. We'll get people that are at the top or close to the top, or they're performing at the level that we require them to be at, but then there may be things that they could improve, or new skills they could learn, or more difficult things they could do, but there's no real tangible benefit to them for doing that, for putting in that work. So trying to motivate them to do more work and to do something more difficult without any sort of like, well, this is what you'll get for it. There's nothing to win, there's, you know.
I think that especially in circus is the case, because for athletes, if they do something more difficult, there's always an opportunity to win something in the end. It's interesting because I had a couple good case lately where I brought back my research, like creativity, and start really opening up the conversation with artists about how could you like express your creativity. And I would say that one really strong motivational factor for some of those artists I've been working with is changing the way they train. And I've sent them some papers or some information about, hey, you don't have to, like, repetition is a way to train, but there's much more different ways. And we've kind of built a plan, and again, I was saying earlier, sometimes coaches are really curious to know these different methods, so I've been in contact with coaches as well and sharing with them different way to train, to push the performance, or just to add a little bit of sparkle into the performance. And when you bring it back to creativity, I just feel it's a really meaningful thing for artists. So I've been using this lately, and I feel it helps. Just, yeah.
Great. Thank you guys so much for spending an hour. Really